I actually imagine that Jenny won't remember as much detail. She would have been in grade 1, I think. Grade 1? Yeah. Around there. She's about 3 years younger than me, so. Some parts will be the same, some parts will be different. She doesn't remember anything anyway. If I remember correctly, it was a plane ride because there weren't any roads. You can't drive up there. It's frozen, and there are no roads. There aren't even any cars, so you have to fly. But my memory of this incident has become a memory of a memory of a memory of a memory because it's a story in my family. It's like an incident, it's an event, and it's one of, in families you have stories, and this is one of the stories. So I don't know if I'm actually remembering what happened or if I just am repeating the story, because I was the youngest as well, so I was probably about 7, and it was traumatic, and so I probably tried to forget it. I think it was a plane ride from Thompson to Puckatawagon, which is a remote northern community. I don't even know what the population would be, 300? I don't even know. And it was a plane ride, and the plane that we took was small, fits maybe 5 or 6 people, and it was really cold and loud. My dad was up in the front in the cockpit for most of the flight with the pilot, and I think it was heated in the cockpit. And my mother and my brother and my sister and I were in the back. And we probably had a pet in a cage, like a guinea pig or a gerbil, which nobody did up north. I mean, it would be like going to Siberia with your stilettos. It's just, I don't know what we were thinking, but I think we had like a guinea pig in a cage, which made us look even weirder. We were really cold, and there was no heat in the plane. And I remember that feeling of seeing my mother scared and worried. And when you're a kid, when I was a kid, it was really upsetting because your parents aren't supposed to be scared. And my mom was scared, and she was telling us not to fall asleep because it was too cold. And it was so cold that we were probably not going to wake up. We were getting hypothermia. And I don't really remember. This is where I don't know if I'm remembering the story or the memory of the memory of the memory, but I don't remember if I was feeling sleepy, or I don't remember if I was feeling cold, but I just remember her telling us not to fall asleep. And somehow we made it. I have no memory of landing or what happened afterwards. It sort of set the tone for a lot of really traumatic, weird experiences. So it was just sort of, here you go. Here's one of many. And that's probably as much as I recall. When I think about it, I've been in so many of those experiences, in maybe a 4 or 5 year period. I was pretty young, so I don't know how to differentiate which place it was. So I don't remember when I landed, but I do recall one memory where we landed and we're unloading the plane, and it's my family getting out, and the people that live there are unloading the plane, and we probably just look like we came from the moon. We had city clothes, proper parkas and coats and boots, and no one really did. Well, they did, but they weren't as new, and we had dogs with us. We flew some dogs in the plane, which nobody would have done. Nobody would have brought dogs from one reserve to another reserve, because pets weren't really looked at the same way as they are here. And then I remember having a guinea pig. It's like a big hamster, and I can still see it. It was in the cage, and it was cold, and it was just in this cage being loaded, and I could load it off the plane, and I could see the guy holding the cage and moving it. I'm just sort of looking at it, wondering, and I saw the guinea pig, and it was screaming like a rabbit would scream. My family moved there because my father had a job, what's called the Department of Indian and Northern Affairs. So he got a job teaching up north, and I think he was teaching at the first place. At other reserves he was a principal, but I think he was a teacher there, and he changed jobs a lot in his life. But I think this one was quite an adventure. And for my mom to agree to it, she did. She agreed. I mean, we had no choice. If I had choice, I would have said no. At the time, at 7 years old, 8 years old, 9, I would have said no way. I was different. We were the only white kids. It was like a third world country. I don't know if that's an expression you're supposed to use now, or developing country, but it was like a ghetto, and it was scary, and it was mean and angry and dirty and different. And when you're an adult and you have a choice, it's different. But and maybe my personality, I wouldn't have chosen that. But now I wouldn't take it back. I wouldn't take it back at all. It was an incredible experience. I was a minority. Privileged minority, but I was a minority. I saw things that none of my friends, when I eventually moved back to Ontario or whatever, went to high school with sort of in Ottawa, none of my friends knew that, had ever seen anything like that. And I mean, it was incredible. It was maybe 4 or 5 years at the most, but it was, every day was one day you'd wake up in the middle of the night by the sound of ice cracking, and it was the lake, and it was called breakup, and so it was the sound of the ice breaking, and it would just, you could hear it everywhere. I had never experienced anything like that, or I don't know, when I think back though, it was all like, it's through the mindset of a child, and it was about survival. A lot of the experiences I had were really strong and really made big impressions, but they were mostly pure fear or desperation, because I was trying to run away from a group of kids that were trying to hurt me, or I was running away from school because I didn't like it. I mean, there were good things. I had made some friends in 1 or 2 of the places. I have an awful story that I think made a big impression, and I know I'm focusing on the negative, but that kind of makes the biggest impression, unfortunately. I had some good times, but I have a really bad story, and it was I think it was in Puckatawagon. I think it was in the first place that we moved to. And there were not wild dogs, but there were lots of dogs that would just run free. And, after they were puppies, most of the time, people didn't let them into their homes. People didn't feed them or pet them. They were just there. And they would scrounge for garbage, or maybe they'd be fed, but they weren't pets. And then the population would get out of control. And they were dangerous because you could be attacked, or they became a nuisance in the community. So they would have dog hunting days, which I think that if you killed a dog, you got a certain amount of money for it, maybe $2 or $5 or $1 for every dog that you killed. And I was a real animal lover, and so was my mom, and we would look at all the dogs when we'd go for a walk. And so one day she and I were walking to the store. The Hudson's Bay was the only store. And I remember it was a spring day, and we had passed this little puppy on the way, really cute puppy that came out and was like jumping around and playing with us. And you saw a bunch of other dogs on the way too, and we had dogs. They just come to live with you. We went into the store, did some shopping, and came out. And I guess in the span of the time that we had gone into the store and out, that somebody had come and shot the dogs. And we're walking home, and it was like this, just this killing field of dead dogs. Actually, not all of them were dead. Most of them were dead, but some of them were limping, had been shot in the leg, and were running around. And it was awful, and my mom couldn't protect me from it. I saw it, and I think I started screaming or crying, and she couldn't cover my eyes, or she couldn't tell me that it was something else. This is what it is. There's dead dogs everywhere, and we saw the puppy dead on the side of the road, and we just had to keep on walking and go home. That experience was one of my first real experiences, because it was in the first place we lived in, and it was similar to a lot of experiences I had in the rest of the reserves. You just had to adjust. It was a different way of living. Animals were different. They weren't pets. They became dangerous, and this is what they did. And the native population, they weren't evil, they weren't bad. It was just a fact of life. Dog hunting day was a day that happened in all the reserves. Often you'd be told it was dog hunting day, but it wouldn't happen. After my first experience, I was pretty aware of when I thought dog hunting day was, and I didn't want to be outside. I didn't want to see it. I mean, you saw dead things everywhere you went anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. But it was just really, it all just sort of seemed to happen that we were out that day and it happened, and then we had to walk through it. It was just, the timing was perfect. That was a defining, memorable moment for me. Yeah. We've all got our stories. Growing up, we only had each other, and we were kind of forced to be each other's friends because we didn't have anybody else to play with. I mean, we did sometimes, but when it came down to it, we were the only ones that really were all we had. And so some of the stuff that we saw, we had to work out together. We had to talk about it and figure it out, the way kids do. I mean, but that was years ago. So when we talk about it now, It's more, we just say, oh, remember that, yeah, I remember that. Because you don't even have to talk about it. There's nothing to say.
You couldn't get there by train or bus or by car. You could only fly there. My father had a job working for Indian Affairs, and he was teaching at this reservation, Puckatawagon, that we had to get to. And we took a very long flight on a really small plane. I think the flight was about 4 hours or so, 4 or 5 hours. And there was no room in the cockpit for everybody. My father and the pilot sat up front, and my mother, my brother, my sister, and I, we sat in the cargo area in the back, and there was no communication between the cockpit and the back. And there was no heat, so we were very, very cold. And probably about halfway through our trip, my brother, sister, and I got so cold we started to fall asleep. We had hypothermia and we were starting to go, and my mother was panicking. She was trying to shake us and yell our names to get us to wake up and lightly slap at our faces. And by the time we landed, we couldn't move. We were absolutely frostbitten. There were locals that met us at the plane. They greeted us with toboggans and blankets. They wrapped us up, put us in the toboggans, and took us up to the house that we were going to be staying in. And I can remember being immersed in a lukewarm bath. And yeah, that's about all I remember of the flight up. I went in at grade 3 and I came out for grade 6 or 7. So we were up there for about 4 years or so. 3-4 years. It's kind of hard to remember because the grades got all mixed up. When we were on the reserves, we often got moved around and jumped ahead a couple of grades, and then, you know, you'd go back to civilization for a couple of months and they'd put you back at another grade, so the timing is difficult to track. There was Puckatawagan, Shelley, Garden Hill, Island Lake, and Moose Factory, Moosonee, so that was 5 different places. It was such a dramatic entry into the North. It was my first experience flying up there, and it was so fraught with danger. That's from the very beginning. It seems to typify a lot of my experience there, the lack of communication, the coldness, a mild sense of panic constantly, and the barren landscape, absolute emptiness, like a huge, huge cold blue sky and just flat, long plains of snow. I remember the sound of the snow when I got out of the plane. The plane was loud when we were in it, so when we landed, everything became a little clearer, and I could hear people's footsteps in the snow as they pulled the toboggan, and I could hear my mother talking to my father, and I can remember her panic and irritated tone when she explained to him that we didn't have any heat in the back. It was remarkably different, the sounds of living up there. There was no background noise, there was no humming of cable lines, there was no traffic. There was no sounds from televisions or radios or anything like that. And not even very many birds. There was some ravens, you could hear them every now and then. Yeah, it was really quiet. I think that we all remember it differently. It was such a strange thing that happens, and everybody's experience is so different. My father's experience was very different because he was up front in the cockpit, so as far as he was concerned, he didn't even experience it. He was warm, and he had no clue that we were cold in the back. So he tended to downplay it. His response right away was, "Oh, you're fine, you know. You survived, it's okay. Quit your complaining." And my mother was very angry and irritated, and she had watched her children like falling into hypothermia sleep, and as far as she was concerned, it wasn't fine. We've talked about it as a family a few times. We laugh about it. It's one of those things that is sort of, you know, it's dangerous and terrible when you go through it, but when you survive it, it becomes funny. So we do remember it, and we kind of laugh at it a little bit now.